General Zyval stood motionless on the bridge of the Dominion warship Vengeance Eternal, his sharp, reptilian eyes fixed on the swirling blue and white orb below. Earth! A backwater planet on the fringes of the galactic maps, barely significant enough to warrant his attention. Yet here he was, poised to lead an invasion. The Dominion demanded expansion, and Earth was an easy target, an isolated world with primitive defenses and a species still bickering among themselves. It would fall like so many others before it. He turned to Colonel Varkesh, his second-in-command, whose black exo-armor gleamed under the dim light of the command deck. The colonel's eyes pulsed with faint bioluminescence beneath his visor, betraying his anticipation. Our scouts report no planetary defenses in the Northern Territories, Varkesh said, his voice crackling through the command channel. Most of their military presence is concentrated in the warmer regions to the south. The tundras are sparsely populated, just a few small settlements, nomadic groups, and wildlife. Zyvar let out a slow, mechanical growl through his helmet's vocoder. Pathetic. He had seen this pattern before, lesser species thinking they could hide behind their climates, their mountains, their oceans, or their desperate will to survive. It never mattered. The Dominion's forces had crushed civilizations in burning deserts, suffocating jungles, and storm-lashed wastelands. The ice would be no different. Deploy the first wave, Zyvar ordered. The Vengeance Eternal trembled slightly as its hangar bays opened, releasing a fleet of sleek black dropships. Inside, hundreds of Dominion soldiers stood in perfect formation, their armor sealed against the cold, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Their suits were equipped with thermal regulators, keeping them comfortable despite the extreme temperatures they were about to face. "Why do these Earthlings even live in such a wasteland?" one trooper muttered as he adjusted his weapon. "They don't live here," another chuckled. "They survive here. There's a difference." Their laughter echoed through the comms. None of them considered the mission difficult. Earth had no planetary shields, no orbital defenses, no countermeasures worth noting. The invasion would be over before the humans could comprehend what had happened. As the dropship sliced through the atmosphere, the viewports displayed the sprawling tundra below, an endless expanse of ice and rock, broken only by towering snow-covered peaks and deep, shadowy ravines. To the Dominion soldiers, it was nothing but a frozen wasteland. But to the warriors waiting below, it was home. The landing. The first dropships touched down with mechanical precision. The landing zones were marked, secured, and reinforced within minutes. Soldiers spilled out into the icy terrain, their boots crunching against the hardened permafrost. Their visors flickered with data, temperature readings, wind speeds, terrain mapping. Cold. That was all their scanners reported. A numbing, unrelenting cold. One of the troopers, Carrick, kicked at the snow with disdain. "This planet is a joke." Another laughed, exhaling a plume of mist inside his helmet. "I was expecting a real battle. Instead, we get frostbite." Colonel Varkesh, hearing their idle chatter, silenced them with a glare. "Stay alert. Primitive species have a tendency to act unpredictably." The troops fanned out in squads, weapons raised, visors scanning for heat signatures. But the landscape seemed devoid of life. No enemy patrols. No resistance. Not even a single aircraft in sight. General Zyvar descended last, his massive form stepping onto Earth's surface like a conqueror claiming his prize. He inhaled the thin, frigid air through his helmet's filtration system and scoffed. The planet's elements were insignificant. His exosuit maintained optimal body temperature, and his armor was impervious to whatever feeble weapons the humans could muster. "This is what they call a battlefield," he muttered. "This is a graveyard, and soon it will be theirs." But even as he spoke, a strange sensation crept over him, an instinct honed through years of war. Something was wrong. The silence was too perfect. He had conquered countless planets, each battle different in landscape but identical in feeling. Resistance always came in waves, ships scrambling, ground troops engaging, desperate attempt to repel the inevitable. But here? Nothing. Not even a distress signal. Zyvar's reptilian gaze swept across the terrain, his enhanced vision picking up the details the others ignored. The way the snow had been disturbed in unnatural patterns, the way certain rocks didn't cast the right shadows, the way the wind carried a scent that did not belong. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement in the snow. A shadow where there should be none. It was gone in an instant, but he had seen it. Sci-Fi's grip on his weapon tightened. "Did you see that?" Varkesh hesitated, adjusting his visor. "Negative. What did you see, General?" Sci-Fi didn't answer. He took a slow step forward, his boot pressing into the ice. His warriors stood beside him, confident, unshaken. They thought the cold was their only enemy. They were wrong. Far beneath the snow, concealed in the howling wind and shifting ice, something ancient stirred. The earth itself was watching, and the true battle was about to begin. The howling wind cut through the tundra like a living entity, swirling around the Dominion soldiers as they advanced into the unknown. Their black and red exosuits stood in stark contrast against the endless white, glowing visors scanning for movement, heat, anything that suggested human resistance. Yet there was nothing. No settlements, no defenses, just a frozen expanse stretching beyond the horizon. General Zyval's instinct still screamed at him. Something was wrong. First contact. Captain Elias Voss lay motionless beneath a thin layer of ice and snow, his breathing slow and measured. His heart pounded against his ribs as he listened to the aliens march past. He could feel the vibrations through the ground. Heavy boots, precise movements, like a machine of war in perfect sync. But for all their technology, the Dominion soldiers were blind to the ancient art of mountain warfare. The Mountain Special Forces, Earth's most elite, hardened warriors, had spent years preparing for an enemy like this. They were ghosts in the snow, trained to be silent, to blend with the ice and use the cold as their weapon. Voss tapped the communicator in his ear. "They are here," he whispered. A voice crackled back. "Wait for the signal." He did. He had patience. Unlike these aliens, whose heavy steps announced their presence to the entire tundra, Voss and his team listened to the snow. They felt it. Then he saw it. A mistake. One of the Dominion soldiers strayed slightly from formation, stepping toward a patch of untouched snow. His movements were confident, careless. Voss almost smirked. The soldier didn't realize that beneath that layer of soft powder lay a pitfall, 6 feet deep and lined with jagged ice. The moment his boot pressed down, the ground gave way. There was no time to react. The Dominion soldier vanished. A scream. Then silence. His squadmates turned, weapons raised, scanning wildly for an enemy. But the snow was still. The wind carried only its natural howls. No gunfire. No signs of an attack. Their comrade was simply gone. Fear creeps in. General Zyval's patience was running thin. "Report!" he barked through the comms. Varkesh responded. "One of our soldiers has disappeared, General." The ground collapsed beneath him. Zyvar clenched his jaw. The landscape was treacherous, yes, but their visors were designed to detect unstable ground. And yet, nothing had warned them. He knew what this meant. The enemy was here, watching, hunting. He switched to a private channel. Deploy the Seekers. The Dominion's elite tracking drones, designed for hostile environments, rose from the soldiers' backs, small but deadly. Their red eyes scanned the terrain in pulses, detecting motion, sound, even breathing from beneath the snow. Zyvar waited. If these humans thought they could rely on terrain and trickery, they were about to learn what true hunters looked like. A new threat. Captain Voss saw the drones rise. His stomach tightened. "Drones up," he whispered. A sharp voice answered through his earpiece. "Sergeant Kira Mendez, his second in command. They find us, we're dead." Voss considered their options. The Dominion was adjusting. That meant it was time to shift tactics. He tapped his communicator. "Send in the shadows." Far in the distance, nestled between ice-covered ridges, a squad of snipers received the order. One by one, they exhaled slowly, fingers steady on the triggers of their specially modified rifles, bullets designed not to explode, but to pierce exosuit joints, sever power lines, and disable without making a sound. The first shot rang out. One of the drones sparked midair, its red glow fading before it even hit the ground. Another, and another. Within seconds, half of the Dominion Seekers were destroyed. Zyvar snarled. "We are under attack." But the enemy was invisible. The wind howled, the ice glistened, the snow shifted. But the humans were nowhere to be seen. And then, just as quickly as the attack began, it stopped. No bodies. No battle cries. No footprints in the snow. Only fear remained. The first kill. Dominion soldiers adjusted their formations, tightening into defensive stances. Sci-Fi had seen this before. This was psychological warfare. The humans were trying to make them doubt themselves, make them hesitate. He would not be rattled. "Burn the ice," he ordered. Flamethrowers ignited. Streaks of fire licking across the snow, melting away the Earth's frozen armor. If the humans were hiding beneath it, the Dominion would smoke them out. And that's exactly what Voss had been waiting for. From the ridgelines above, explosives detonated. The ground beneath the Dominion forces erupted, sending ice and fire in every direction. The controlled charges, buried days before, had transformed the battlefield into a collapsing nightmare. Dominion soldiers fell screaming into hidden ravines. Others were buried under sudden avalanches triggered by the blast. The flames they had unleashed worked against them now, melting ice too quickly, revealing deadly chasms that swallowed them whole. And amidst the chaos, the mountain special forces struck. Voss and his team emerged from their hidden positions, moving like phantoms through the snow. Blades flashed, silenced weapons whispered death, and before the Dominion could mount a proper response, a dozen of their soldiers were down. General Zyval's fury boiled. "Retaliate!" he roared. But there was no clear enemy to retaliate against. They were fighting shadows. A terrifying realization. Colonel Varkesh clutched his rifle, scanning the battlefield in growing panic. "This isn't war," he murmured. "This is predation." Zyvar turned to him sharply. "Explain." Varkesh swallowed. "We are not conquering them. They are hunting us." It hit Zyvar then, the horrifying truth. These humans, these so-called primitives, were not fighting like an army defending its home. They were fighting like apex predators defending their territory. This tundra was not their weakness. It was their weapon, and the Dominion had walked straight into their trap. The nightmare begins. As the last echoes of the avalanche faded, the snow settled, leaving behind an eerie silence. Some Dominion soldiers remained standing, still searching for their unseen enemy. Then, one by one, their helmets' communications began to fail. Their HUDs flickered. Their weapon systems glitched. Their visors dimmed. Panic spread through their ranks. "General, my suit. I'm losing power. They're inside our systems." Zyvar's blood ran cold. He toned sharply, just in time to see one of his soldiers clutch his helmet, screaming, before something unseen yanked him backward into the blizzard. Then another, and another. The mountain special forces weren't just fighting with guns. They had infiltrated the Dominion's own technology, disrupting them from the inside. Zyval's fists clenched. The hunt was no longer one-sided. The hunters had become the hunted, and Earth's ghosts in the snow were just getting started. The wind had changed. General Zyvar could feel it, even through the thick insulation of his exosuit. It wasn't just a biting cold that cut through the air, nor the snow swirling in unpredictable eddies. It was something deeper, something primal, the feeling of being watched. Dominion soldiers were trained to be predators. They had conquered worlds, crushed armies, slaughtered civilizations without hesitation. But this was different. This wasn't war. This was survival. The last transmission. "General, we've lost contact with Alpha and Delta squads," a soldier reported, his voice tinged with something Zyvar rarely heard from his troops. "Fear." Zyvar clenched his jaw. Re-establish communication. The soldier worked furiously at his wrist console, his gauntlet flickering with red error codes. "It's not working. There's interference. So..." Varkesh stepped forward. "Interference? From where?" The soldier hesitated. "Unknown, Colonel, but it's adaptive. Every time we adjust our frequency, the signal distortion moves. It's like something is hunting our comms." Zyval's blood chilled. They weren't just fighting human soldiers. They were fighting ghosts. Then a sound broke through the static. A voice. It was garbled, distorted, but unmistakably one of their own. "They're inside. We can't. Shadows everywhere." The transmission cut off with a scream. Then silence. The darkness closes in. Colonel Varkesh turned to Zyval, his expression unreadable beneath his helmet. General, we need to regroup. They are picking us off one by one. We should retreat to the landing zone and call for reinforcements. Sci-Fi bristled. The Dominion did not retreat, but even he knew something was terribly wrong. Gather what remains of Beta and Gamma squads, he ordered. We consolidate our forces and move as one. The order was given, and the remaining troops, less than 50 of the original 100, tightened their formation. They moved through the snow in near silence, their footsteps muffled by the thick ice beneath them. Each soldier's visor was on high alert, scanning for any sign of movement. But the humans had vanished. No bodies, no blood, nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. And then the blizzard arrived. A storm unlike anything Sci-Fi had ever seen. The wind roared like a living beast, visibility dropping to nearly zero. Snow slammed against their armor with enough force to disorient even the most seasoned soldier. Their technology, so advanced, so superior, became useless. Thermal scanners? Jammed. Motion trackers? Useless in the chaos. Communications? Dead. They were blind. And then the first scream tore through the storm. The breaking point. Sci-Fi turned just in time to see a soldier yank backward, disappearing into the white abyss. No gunfire. No enemy in sight. Just gone. Another scream. Another vanished. Panic spread through the ranks. Fire! Fire at will, someone shouted. The air erupted with streaks of plasma bolts, red beams cutting through the snowstorm. They fired in all directions, desperate, hoping to hit something. But they hit nothing. Then came the whispers, not from the comms, not from each other, from the wind itself. Low, haunting, almost melodic, a predator's lullaby, echoing through the storm. Zyvo's heart pounded against his ribs. What kind of enemy was this? Then, movement. Not in front of them. Above. A figure dropped from the cliffs, landing silently behind the last man in formation. Before he could react, a knife slid through his exosuit throat joint, silencing him instantly. Another came from below, emerging from the snow itself, grabbing a Dominion soldier by the ankles and dragging him beneath the ice. His screams faded as the ground swallowed him whole. It was calculated, precise, surgical. The humans weren't attacking in rage or desperation. They were toying with them, and it was working. The choice. Colonel Vakesh turned to Zyval, his voice urgent. General, we have to fall back now. Zyval had never retreated from a battlefield, never fled. But for the first time in his career, he was faced with an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't predict, couldn't control. His soldiers, once an unstoppable force, were being slaughtered like animals. His pride told him to fight. His instincts told him to run. A decision that should have been easy. But before he could make it, a shot rang out, and Colonel Vakesh dropped to his knees, a perfect bullet hole in the side of his visor. Dead. Zyval's breath caught. For a moment, he was frozen. Then something deep within him snapped. Enough. The last stand. Form a perimeter, he bellowed, rage replacing his fear. Cover the retreat. The remaining soldiers tightened their ranks, weapons raised, forming a desperate last stand. Zyval switched his rifle to full power, unloading bursts of plasma into the swirling white. Figures flickered in and out of sight, shadows that vanished before a trigger could be pulled. But then Zyval saw him, a single human, standing at the edge of the storm. No helmet, no heavy armor, just a man. His face was lined with scars, his eyes cold and unyielding. He held no weapon, yet he radiated something terrifying. Control, command. And in that moment, Zyva realized a horrifying truth. This wasn't some ragtag resistance. This was a trap. They had never stood a chance. The human, Voss, tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing Zyvi. Then, in a voice that cut through the storm like a blade, "Run!" And for the first time in his life, General Zyvi obeyed. The white abyss claims its prey. The retreat was chaos. Soldiers scrambled, slipping on ice, firing wildly at enemies they couldn't see. The landing zone was still miles away, and with each passing second, more of them fell. Zyvar ran, his breath ragged. Behind him, he could hear them coming. Not soldiers, not an army, predators. By the time the Dominion reached their extraction point, only a handful remained. As the warships ascended, fleeing the frozen hellscape below, Zyvar stood at the bridge, staring down at Earth. His heart pounded. His hands shook, not from the cold, from something he had never experienced before. Defeat. And as the Dominion ships vanished into the void, the mountain special forces stood atop the frozen peaks, watching, waiting, because they knew the Dominion would return, and next time, they'd be ready. The Dominion warships tore through the sky, streaking away from Earth's atmosphere like wounded beasts fleeing a predator. From the bridge of his flagship, General Zyval sat in silence, staring out into the void. The quiet hum of the ship's systems barely registered in his mind. His fingers gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly that the metal groaned beneath his strength. He had fought in 100 wars, burned planets to ash, reduced entire species to myths. But today, he had fled, and that was something he could never forgive. The message in the snow. Back on Earth, the mountain special forces stood at the edge of the battlefield, their faces hidden beneath layers of cold weather gear. Captain Elias Voss surveyed the destruction, his breath curling into the freezing air. The bodies of Dominion soldiers lay scattered across the ice, their once impervious exosuits now little more than lifeless husks. The storm had buried most of the evidence, covering the blood, the weapons, the struggle. But one thing remained untouched. A message, carved into the snow by a fallen Dominion soldier, frozen fingers barely finishing the final letter before death claimed him. Not human. Voss exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting to his second-in-command, Sergeant Kira Mendez. "They still don't understand," she muttered. "They will," Voss replied. "Soon." Because what the Dominion had failed to grasp, what no invading force ever truly understood, was that the Tundra did not belong to men. It belonged to the mountains. And the mountains never forgot. The fury of a conqueror, far beyond Earth, in the heart of Dominion space, the supreme chancellor of the Dominion sat upon his throne of obsidian metal. His reptilian features were unreadable as he watched the holographic replay of the failed invasion. Beside him, General Zyvar knelt, head bowed, waiting for judgment. The silence stretched unbearably before the chancellor finally spoke. "You ran," he said. Zyvar's jaw clenched. He had expected these words. He had expected worse. They were not what we anticipated, Zyvar admitted. "No," the chancellor agreed. "They were less." Zyvar hesitated. "No, my lord, they were more." The chancellor's piercing gaze flicked toward him. "Explain." Zyvar swallowed his pride and spoke the truth. "They were waiting for us. Their mountains swallowed our dead without a trace. Their soldiers were shadows. Their weapons were the ice, the wind, the very ground we walked upon. We did not fight an army. We fought." He hesitated. The memory of Captain Voss's eyes, calm, unshaken, unafraid, haunted him. "We fought something else." The chancellor's face remained impassive. Then he leaned forward slightly, his golden robes catching the dim light of the throne room. "And yet you live." Zyvar tensed. "This means one of two things," the chancellor continued. "Either you are a coward unworthy of your rank, or you were allowed to leave." Zyval's heart pounded. Allowed. It had been gnawing at him since the moment he boarded his ship, since the moment he saw Voss standing there, watching, waiting. The humans could have hunted them all down. They let them leave. "Return," the chancellor ordered, his voice cold as death. "Take everything. Burn their mountains to the ground." Zyvar hesitated. His instinct screamed at him, but disobedience meant death. "Yes, my lord." The Earth fights back. The second invasion came swiftly. Thousands of Dominion warships darkened Earth's sky, blotting out the stars with their sheer numbers. Zyvar, leading the assault, watched as waves of drop pods rained down upon the mountains. This time, they would not underestimate the humans. This time, they would leave nothing but fire and ruin in their wake. The first wave of Dominion forces touched down. Their war machines, towering and indestructible, tore through the ice, clearing paths with flamethrowers that turned the tundra into molten slush. Nothing could survive this. Nothing should survive this. But then, the silence came again. No alarms, no explosions, just absence. Zyvar watched his soldiers advance into the mountains, and then he watched them disappear. One by one. No enemy fire. No signs of battle. Just gone. Then the screams began. But they weren't coming from the battlefield. They were coming from inside the Dominion warships. Zyvar's blood turned to ice. Impossible. His soldiers were still on the ground. So who was on his ship? The lights flickered. The doors locked. Then, a whisper. You shouldn't have come back. A knife flashed in the darkness, and General Zyvar saw his own blood splatter across the control panels before everything went black. The final warning. When the Dominion fleet did not return, the Supreme Chancellor sent scouts to investigate. They found nothing. No wreckage. No bodies. Not even ships. As if the entire invasion force had been swallowed. But the Chancellor did receive something. A single transmission. A video. It showed an empty mountain ridge, untouched and serene. Then, slowly, they emerged. The mountain special forces. Not an army. Not soldiers. Something else. Their faces hidden beneath snow-covered gear, their movements inhumanly precise. And at the center of the screen, standing motionless, was Captain Elias Voss. He stared directly into the camera. No words, just a warning. Then the video ended, and the message was clear. Earth was not to be conquered. Earth was not to be touched, because the Dominion had not invaded a planet. They had invaded a graveyard, and the dead had buried them. The ice remembers. Years later, when whispers of Earth reached the farthest corners of the galaxy, civilizations shuddered. They spoke of the world that does not forgive, the mountains that devour, the soldiers who were not men, but ghosts. No one dared return, not even the Dominion, because some places are never meant to be conquered. Some places belong to the shadows, and some battles never end. They only wait.